Well, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us for our investment readiness series here. My name is Cameron Law. I serve as the executive director of the Carlson Center for Innovation and Entrepreneurship, and we serve as a regional hub and platform for providing approachable and accessible entrepreneurial education, community, and support to enable startup founders of all backgrounds to start and scale their ventures. And we're really excited to be partnering with the Tech Futures Group on this 4-part series. This first session is going to be diving into customer validation, and this series is all framed around really diving into the bio and climate tech space, and hopefully gearing up and giving you the tools and frameworks to be investor ready. And we're excited to be partnering with the Tech Futures Group, and this series is funded through a partnership which is led by the Sacramento Entrepreneurial Growth Alliance, which is a regional group that's advancing entrepreneurship and innovation as a driver for economic development. And we've been funded by the California Office of the Small Business Advocate to be bringing this 4-part series to you. And so just a little level set for some housekeeping. I will be keeping an eye out on the chat and would love for you to throw your questions and comments in there. As you're seeing, we are recording this session, so we know a question we often get is this going to be recorded and shared? We will be following up with the recording after, as well as the slides. So feel free to just hop in, engage in the conversation, use the Q&A chat feature, and I'll be bringing those in for our guests. So I'm going to turn it over to Steve to take it from here, but we're really excited to have you all here in the space, and looking forward to engaging you in this 4-part series. So thank you, Tech Futures Group, for partnering with us, and take it away, Steve.
Thanks, Cameron, and good afternoon, everybody. I think the other thing to keep an eye on the chat, let Cameron know if ambient noise on my end becomes a problem at all, and I can make adjustments here. So great to see you all. As Cameron mentioned, this is session 1 on a series in investment readiness. We're going to focus on customer validation today. Advance my slides here. So we're going to spend, 2 minutes on introductions. You didn't come to hear who we are. I'm going to spend a few minutes on an overview of the whole investment readiness series and the particular perspective we're taking on this. And then we'll dive into customer validation, and we'll have plenty of time for Q&A at the end. Cameron will be filtering, as he said, for questions that are appropriate in the moment. They might be around clarification or a follow-on to a particular topic. And then more general questions we'll bunch up for the end. So you all know Cameron. I'm Steve Plume, affiliated with the Tech Futures Group. In my day job, I run a small early-stage venture fund in Menlo Park. I've been a startup exec 4 times, and then a whole lot of years in consulting. And one of the reasons I got asked to take care of today is because the last time I've done the math, I've done about 10,000 customer interviews in my career. It's not less, it might be more. Andy, I know you're sitting at in an airport, but can you give us 15, 20 seconds?
Hi, thanks everybody. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Yeah, I'm at an airport, so I'm going to be off camera for a while, but nice to meet everybody. I am Andy Leventhal. I've also been an operating executive for over 35 years. I've started 2 climate companies myself, and I've been an executive sort of in the sales, go-to-market, business development, operating capacity for about 15 companies, and been in climate for about the last 13 years. And have seen kind of 1.0 and clean tech 1.0, and now as we move into what we call climate. Thank you.
Thanks, Andy. Paul, you want to do the same, please?
Great, thanks, Steve. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Paul Bozzo. I'm an advisor with the Tech Futures Group. My specialty is primarily seed and early stage technology company. I've worked with hundreds of them, and I'm a specialist in particularly the business planning, financials, and funding part of that. And I'll be presenting the 4th webinar in our series. And I did run a startup accelerator in the Bay Area that's focused on clean tech companies. We had about 100 companies through that program. I did a lot of work with angel and VC investments. So glad I'm here. Thank you.
Great. And Dave is not on yet, but he's a good person for all of you to know. He runs the Bay Area outpost of iCore, and he's going to be joining us as soon as he can, probably around 1 o'clock, to participate in Q&A. And he'll give him probably a longer self-introduction at that point. Okay, so why us? Most of you probably have no idea who this guy is, but you get the general point of view. You know, Paul, Andy, Dave, we've been in this venture game a long time, and we're going to try in the series to give you kind of the tools to steer around most of the rocks in the river. Shelves of books, if not entire libraries, have been written about each of the 4 topics we're covering in the series, and many of them are really good, and we'll point you towards a few of those during the course of today's talk. But you also, talking with Cameron, I think I hope I've got the right idea. You need less, news you can use today, which aren't necessarily in the books or ChatGPT is going to give you. So we're going to be as practical as we can, and we're going to look at all of these topics through the prism of investment readiness. And another way to phrase that is, what's the point of view of a professional, prospective, institutional investor? So we're not talking friends and family. We're not talking most angel investors, but someone whose job it is to return above market returns to their shareholders. There's a pervasive myth that I've been watching for more years than I care to count, that VCs are somehow in the market to support young entrepreneurs with this kind of charitable point of view. That's not what they do. They get paid to make money for their investors. And you need to, the more you wrap your head around that perspective, the better you're going to be when you go into pitch to professional investors. In the context of climate tech, of course, there's a lot more access to grants and PPPs and other non-dilutive funding situations. We can touch on those as we go through, but I tell you, if you've done what you need to do to clear the bar on VC funding, then you'll do just fine in those other vehicles. And certainly nothing you do in pursuit of venture funding is going to hurt you. The other thing to understand is just how big is this challenge? It's pretty big. Let me put it in a couple of ways. To go back to the venture guys, keep in mind, their job is to take as much of your company at the lowest possible price. That's what they get paid to do, and they get paid very well to do it because they're very good at it. Your job is to resist that squeeze while attracting their money. So it's a fine balancing act. And, honestly, most people don't make it. Effectively, all startups never raise an institutional round. And once they've raised the first round, 70% never get that second round. I'm not trying to scare you away, right? Thousands of companies raise tens of billions of dollars every year in venture capital. So it's very doable. But, another myth is that investors are looking for, innovative business plans with good technology and smart and charismatic founders who are going to make a difference in the world. They see those companies by the thousands. That's not the differentiator. The differentiating factor is risk. And, go back to the teeter-totter of price versus getting the money. Why does one in a couple hundred, 1 out of 300 get funded? The ones that get the money from the good investors, and believe me, you want a good investor. We can talk about that another day or in Paul's session. You want to be very picky about your investors. Is they've reduced risk from the investor's point of view. The VCs are looking for the best opportunities that have been de-risked as much as possible. And they're always looking forward to that second round, right? If I write you a check today, under what conditions will I write you a second check and attract that next larger investor who can write the next larger check? So you need to look like a company that's got a reasonable chance of getting funded, not just this time, but a second time. There are some really common milestones that align risk and fundability each stage of the company's growth. We'll talk about those more probably in go-to-market for sure, once you have some more context. But for now, the main point is, de-risk it. What do the professional investors need to hear and see from a startup? What work do you need to put in before you meet with them to put your company at the head of the line? And so our goal over the next 4 weeks is to give all of you the tools you need to be perceived as being in that top 0.5% of companies that walk into any given venture firm and get funded. And so we're also going to try to convince you that it's worth putting in the time and effort that we're going to talk about over the next few weeks. Every firm has its own risk framework. So I don't want to tell you this is carved in stone. It's just one example. You know, every startup has technical risk. In climate tech, you may be anywhere from a consumer device through enterprise software, through some kind of, you know, first of a kind technology that's going to take 20 years and billions of dollars to reach scale. All those carry different levels of technical risk. And that's always present. Market opportunity, market demand, competitive risk, channel and go-to-market risk. Those are all subject to customer validation exercises, and that's really where we're going to be focused today. And then there's execution risk, of course. There's always financial and capital risk. The team, you know, who's on the team now? What skills do they have? Where are you going to find the people? You know, addressing each of these is going to take you a long way towards being a credible, de-risked opportunity. And then, you know, as we get into climate tech, you've got, you know, in ways that many other industries don't, you may have regulatory issues and rather unique scaling issues. And those can also be addressed in kind of corner cases of customer validation. And so we'll be talking about that.
Hey, Steve.
Yeah.
This is Andy. I'm going to interject just a moment here because I think it's a good time to frame a conversation you and I had in preparation for today. The term, for all of you on the call here, the term climate tech is a challenging thing to wrap our heads around. I think we all know that there's a lot of wind in the sail of that term, but in reality, each of you are running companies most likely in their own lane that have unique characteristics. They have unique buyers, they have unique competition, they have unique pricing, they have unique regulatory frameworks. So to try to kind of capture customer validation under the broadest umbrella called climate is challenging. We want to just make sure each of you recognize that, you know, we would need to have a more of an opportunity to speak to you about your unique market dynamics. You know, pick solar versus electric vehicles. Like those two things really have no commonality in buyers and in sales cycle length and what kind of salespeople you want to hire, what kind of go-to-market strategies you deploy. But we want to just we're going to go in and out of that frame. And I wanted to call it out so that you don't think we're sort of missing that opportunity.
Yeah, thanks, Andy. And I'll add on to those comments. I was just checking in the chat. Someone asked about climate tech versus biotech. 95% of everything we're going to talk about today and in the rest of the series is applicable across early stage ventures, kind of independent of what category you're in. As you get into bio, and again, maybe Andy and Paul have more domain knowledge there than I do and can address some of the specific things, but it's the same thing: technical risk, market opportunity. I mean, a healthcare example that I often hear used is if you're working on a cure for cancer, you really don't have to worry about market demand. The market demand is infinite. You do have to worry about technical risk. If you're in software, you don't really have to worry about technical risk. And software is pretty easy when you get right down to it. What you really have to worry about is, have you built the right product for the market and what's the competitive situation? As you get into some of the lanes of climate tech and biotech, now you have to add on top of those two major sequential risks, your regulatory risk or your scaling risk. But we can talk about that more as we go. Okay, Andy, were you done? I'm going to assume yes, so you don't have to come off mute. So with that as the overview of investment readiness, investor readiness, we've broken this into 4 buckets because, you know, time, and we have to draw a line somewhere. So today's customer validation. Next week we'll talk about product development and market fit. The 20th we'll talk about go-to-market strategy and execution, and then on the 27th, Paul will wrap it all up with investor readiness. But the key point here is it's iterative. It is 2 steps back, forward, 1 step back and a step to the side, and then do it again. You will be looping among these as you scale your business. A key point I would make, and I will repeat this, is, oh my God, is it easier to iterate before you've spent all your money on developing and launching your product? Once you've launched and you have to go back to the beginning, that's called a pivot, and that's expensive. If you make those changes before you spend all your money in product development and scaling up your team or your channel or whatever it may be, wow, is that a better outcome? So keep that in mind, please. Okay, so let's there we are, 12:18. That's the overview. Let's dig into customer validation. 2 of the first questions you're going to get when you walk into a pitch meeting are, how many potential customers have you talked to and what have you learned? The customer validation is the process of talking to enough participants in the market, and we will define enough and participants as we go through today, so that you can credibly argue to your potential investors that you have de-risked the investment proposition. And you know you've done it when you can answer these 2 questions thoughtfully and factually and credibly. There are right answers to these questions, and we're going to get there. But let me just take a quick detour on the wrong answers to these questions. Any of these are just going to get you a hard no. I've heard all of these. Depending on the politeness of the venture capitalist, he may kick you out of his office and not waste the time, or just switch over to playing Wordle until you're done. But any of these responses are inexcusable. I know no one on this call would possibly do this because, you know, the Carlson Institute is absolutely coaching you not to. But do not go here. These are red flags to a bull. You will be voted off the island, gonged, hooked, whatever you want to call it, because what you've done is you've just increased the level of risk, not decreased it. The founder who says some things like this are not founders that want to be invested in. You're, lazy, uninformed. So why do you do customer validation? I mean, I hope I've kind of convinced you with the de-risk thing. And really the first reason to do customer validation is the very practical one. It's a checklist item on the due diligence process for you to raise good money at a good valuation. The second one, if we come up to 35,000 feet, is way more important. It's going to save you. It's going to save you potentially millions of dollars and potentially years of your life. And you really, really want to do it. And there are 3 outcomes of doing this, right? You can improve or shorten the path you're on. That's great. It can knock you off a doomed path. Get down on your knees and thank your lucky stars that you didn't invest, 7 or 8 or 12 years of your life in something that wasn't going to work. Or it can help you find a new path that you never would have imagined. A point a friend made yesterday is, remember, 70% of more startups that get funding then fail. That means a majority of companies launch only to find out that the market doesn't care. It's much, much cheaper to find that out before development than after development. Cheaper in every way, financially, time, emotions, family relationships, everything you can imagine gets better if you do it earlier. So what is it? I mean, obviously, you don't need me to Google. You don't need me to read the words, but this is the first hit I got on Google. At least 5 of you just scored bingo. So let me take it out if consultants speak for you. And I want to unpack each of these underlined items because they're all important. And again, I'll give you a moment to, read the 5 lines and then let's unpack each one of these. One thing. Customer validation does have an early phase and a late phase. You can think of the early phase as discovery and the late phase as focus. And I admit to having been on the bandwagon of people, pounding the table and yelling, focus, focus, focus for a lot of years until I was at a panel with Vinod Khosla from Khosla Ventures a while ago. And he said, the worst thing a very early stage startup can do is focus. And the whole room went silent because it was like, wow, none of us have ever thought that before. And his point was, if you're early stage, it's a divergent process of all the pains and problems out there that fit the general field you're looking at. You know, the swim lanes that Andy mentioned that would span climate tech or biotech. Which one are you going to work on? Is it big enough? Is it important enough? And another key point to mention here is initially that signal is going to be very, very weak. You're going to have to hear it a bunch of times before there's a strength out there that starts to be compelling. As you iterate around, remember the loopy things on the diagram from a few slides ago, you're going to start realizing there's a strong signal, and you're going to start converging on the problem you think you're going to solve, the pain you think you're going to soothe, the solution you think you're going to provide. And that's the point where this really flips the switch over to focus. Now it's a convergent process. And the thing I try to convince early stage entrepreneurs of is what's on the slide, but I'll read it. Just because you can do many things for many different customer segments does not mean that you should. Time is the universe's way of making sure that everything doesn't happen all at once. Take advantage of that. If you try to do a lot of different things, you will be beaten at every single thing you try to do by somebody. Go do one thing really well, be the best, and then as you scale, you can get into, and we'll talk about this as we get into go-to-market, but you can scale, you can move into other things as you're bigger and have more assets. Do it well. Many people have said this, don't be incrementally better, be fundamentally different. The most recent time I saw it was from the CEO and founder of New Bank in Mexico, Challenger Bank in Latin America. Peter Thiel talks about this at length, and I think extremely well in his book, 0 to 1. You've got to be head and shoulders above any other solution that's out there, whether it's a legacy solution, a in-house do-it-yourself solution, or any other startup trying to come here. Gives you a technical head start, gives you a customer head start, gives you what Thiel refers to as monopoly pricing, and we'll talk more about that. And it gives you a longevity advantage. You know, a nice example here that everyone's going to know is, I'll go to iPhones, which are clearly not climate tech and clearly not startups. I haven't seen a breakdown in a little while, but a couple of years ago anyway, it was still true that Apple made more margin on every iPhone than any other vendor got in gross revenue. That is monopoly level pricing that gives you a competitive advantage and longevity and allows you, if you need to drop your price in order to meet competition. So I'm going to tell you never to do that, but that's a different conversation. Next, specific customer cohort. This really goes along with do one thing well, but do one thing well for a group of people who value it tremendously. And that's really what this slide and the next slide is about. That's a Peter Thiel quote on the right. Every great company is built on the support of a small number of committed users. He was talking about Twitter in that context. So think of how many millions of users Twitter has, or had before Elon bought it. It was built on 3 or 4 dozen customers. And that's where you get. And what do you get? Once again, it's a pricing and economic advantage. It lowers your customer acquisition costs by orders of magnitude because you have a network effect of people who have the same problem. They know each other, whether it's a consumer market and they all really do know each other, or it's an enterprise market and they all go to the same conferences and read the same journals. And it's a beautiful product laboratory. Even if you do all the work that we are advocating that you do here, you're going to hit the market with a product that is at best 70 to 80% product market fit. That's just the top, that's top performers. If you're working with a small group of committed customers who want you to succeed as much as you want you to succeed, your product will be better, faster, and therefore more. You hold your price point, you hold your margins, and you get better customer acquisition and faster revenue growth. All of which that second round investor is going to value tremendously. And I'll go back to Andy and I were laughing about this the other day because, Jeffrey Moore wrote this book roughly before electricity was invented. But we were both in our careers already. It's worth revisiting, Crossing the Chasm, but his basic point here is whatever market you're in, and that's what the graph is, there are some true innovators, known in other places as visionaries. Steve Blank has some cute pun on it with evangelists and visionaries that I can never pronounce. It's a very small percentage of the market. They are mathematically, by definition, the people who will pay you more and faster because they need your solution more than anyone else. Once you understand them extremely well, then you can move to the next group, which are early adopters. And then where many companies, literally fall into the chasm, and that's why it's called that and written that way, is then you have a functionality gap and a price sensitivity gap and a market behavior gap to what Jeffrey called the early majority. And that's a huge transition, but that usually happens after kind of Series B, maybe even Series C. You don't have to worry about that quite yet. Don't worry about the percentages too much. Is it 0.5 or 3? It's 1 to 2%. It's somewhere in there. They're the people who really understand you and want you. The other thing here with working with these is if you confine yourself to the innovator market once you understand them, it makes you tremendously more capital efficient. You're wasting way less money in marketing, in sales, in product development, in customer service. Everything you can imagine, you're saving money. And I've really come to the conclusion over this number of years in venture that capital efficiency is if not the number one leading indicator of a company's ultimate success, it's pretty damn close to the top. How fast can you grow on how little capital? I will also tell you, go back to one of the opening slides, as a founder, the more capital efficient you are, the more of your own company you get to keep. That's a good thing. Keep that in mind. So, the goal, right? What do you want to do out of customer validation? You want to clearly identify and be able to present the cure for a real pain felt by your target customer base. And really not a solution to a current problem. And this kind of resonates back to what I was talking about a few minutes ago. It's going to be a weak signal because the biggest companies are identifying pains that most of the market doesn't even know exist. And that means they've got legs under them. They're going to be super important over time. Remember, you're 2 to 4 years from product launch, 2 to 4 years from scaling, and 8 to 12 years from maturity and exit. So this has to be a pain that is felt for a long time in a big way. If you go trying to build a better mousetrap, a solution to a current problem that a lot of people recognize, first, I guarantee a whole lot of other companies see the same thing and they're trying to do the same thing. And it probably doesn't have legs. It's going to be solved sooner than you think. So you're looking for, a frequent analogy here is, do you have a cure for a disease, or do you have a couple of aspirin for a headache? You're looking for cures for major diseases. How do you know when you found it?
Steve?
Yeah, go ahead, please.
This is Andy again. Again, I love what you just said, and I think just to highlight, remember that all people and all companies have problems. The people who have pain are those that don't want to go to bed at night with it and don't want to wake up in the morning with it and are willing to throw huge amounts of money to eliminate that pain. And hopefully there are lots of other peers of theirs, either people that work for them or alongside them or in other departments, that share that pain. And that's when people move mountains to buy stuff and make a change in their life because they don't want to suffer that any longer.
Yep. Well said. Thank you. And I think that puts color on how do you know when you found it? And then we're going to, change gears here and start, as promised, giving you tools you can use. Again, I've heard all of these in live customer interviews. And the winner, if you get the one in the upper right and the person you're interviewing asks if they can join your company, you have hit the gold scene. You can ring the bell and declare victory, at least until Monday morning, and then you go back to work. But you know, I've had people ask to join the advisory boards, asked to invest, asked to be on the beta site. You know, when is this available? We are looking for this solution right now. Not everybody gets here. I don't want to tell you this is, you know, the minimum standard you have to meet, but boy, if you do meet it, you're onto a winner. And the farther away you are from this, the more risk you're still living with. And to repeat something I think I said earlier, right? If you get this, your product market fit stage is going to be much, much shorter, because you're probably not at 70% of product market fit. You're probably closer to 80 or 90%, right? You're at the very top percentile of companies who figured it out. And you don't have to do discovery during your product market fit stage. You can go straight to scaling, one hopes. Okay, so customer validation. Cameron, let me just pause there. Are there any questions or comments we should address at this point before we switch gears?
You addressed the one that was asked earlier. I'll maybe make a pause and see if there's anyone who wants to throw a quick question in there, but I think you're on point. Going once, going twice. Oh, here we go.
Okay, so just like the overall investment readiness process, the customer validation process is a sequence. It's not, you know, checklist that you can stop and, you know, say I'm done. You're going to start with discovery, looking for those signals. You're going to move to solution, where you kind of flip it around and start saying, okay, we understand this pain point, we understand this problem, here's our solution, what do you think? You're going to move to willingness to pay, and then finally to scale. The guys at Simon Kushner Partners, who wrote a book called Monetizing Innovation some years ago that I recommend, actually doubled down on this and argued very strongly and compellingly that you should design your product around the willingness to pay. And I'll leave it as an exercise for the interested audience member to go check out the book. But it's definitely, you know, it is 10 years old now, but it's definitely worth at least, you know, reading, or at least asking GPT for a summary. You need to understand the breadth and depth of this exercise, especially early on. You want to be talking to anyone you can talk to who might possibly influence the purchasing decision of whatever your solution is going to be. So that's, you know, if I go back and reference the risk framework, what you're addressing here is market demand or market opportunity. And you want to talk to prospective customers, but in the bottom here, I've blown that out. So think of the segments as personas, as subsets of prospective customers that you want to go after. And in your segment, you know, who's your market? Is it consumers? Is it SMBs, small, medium business, small, medium enterprise, in case you don't know the acronyms? Are you going after enterprises or big industrial companies? You're going after governments? How many customers are there possibly? Consumers, it's going to be, one hopes, tens or hundreds of millions. Governments, I mean, there may be 8 countries on the planet who are going to buy what you're going to do. But you need to know where you are in that mix, and then go look at the personas who are going to influence this. And I cannot possibly list out all the personas that might be relevant. That's going to be dependent, absolutely, company by company. But users for sure. Okay, who influences the users? In an enterprise, your buyer might be, oh, let's say the chief revenue officer, but your influencers are going to be from marketing, from customer support, from finance, from the CEO, maybe even from their customers. If you're in a consumer market, goodness knows, it's social media influencers. And you have to think about all those. Who's the real buyer? You find, especially in large organizations, that the people who use it are not the people who have to approve the purchase. You better understand who those economic decision makers are and how they reach their decisions. Who are the functional heads, if it's, you know, enterprise or government or even SMB. There may be, you know, an executive committee where everyone kind of gets a vote depending on how big the purchase order is. That's another thing to know. For everyone that winds up being in the decision chain for purchasing your product or your service, What level is their purchase authority and where do they have to kick it upstairs? You can do some really, really interesting things around pricing and packaging to take advantage of purchase authority. And then finally, you've got the really fun people to deal with. Once you've proven the value and the ROI and your prospect wants you, now you get to deal with finance, legal, and procurement. Enjoy. But you better know how they make their decisions and what their priorities are. I'll say it again a little bit later, but a key issue here is you can't ask any of these people, hey, does this sound good? And a friend of mine uses the following example. If I tell you, I can get you on an airplane from San Francisco to New York in an hour, does that sound good? Everybody says yes. Of course it sounds good. If I leave out the information that it's going to cost you $10,000, your interest level might change. And if I said, oh, by the way, 25% of them blow up in the air, your interest level is really going to change. So you have to, we'll come back to this, but don't lead your witnesses. You have to ask open-ended questions and give them the true ability to respond without either leading them or leaving out critical information. Andy, was there anything you wanted to add to this one? Because you and I talked about through this one a bit.
No, I'm good. I think you're hitting all the points. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Steve, there was a quick question. I think it was on the slide prior. You mentioned a book, and I think, or maybe it was actually on that slide. You mentioned a book. I didn't quite catch it.
It's called Monetizing Innovation. It was written by two guys at Simon Kushner Partners, and I have it on a slide called Resources at the end of the deck.
Very good. Thank you.
Second factor. So I just collapsed all the prior slide into that row there called market demand and prospective customers. But you really need to be looking at competition as well. Your prospective customers will tell you about this, but go look for established vendors in the market. How are they, and that might also be adjacent vendors. Competition is one thing, co-opetition is another, and maybe there's collaboration possible. And who are potential customers, both in startup land and among existing participants. I mean, another truism about venture capital is as smart and innovative as every entrepreneur is, if you walk into my office with a pitch on something, I promise you, I'm seeing at least 3 more with pretty much the same idea sometime in that 3-month period. So don't be too certain that no one else has this idea, and don't be too confident about, going back to the risk. One of the decisions the venture capitalist has to make is not just to put his or her bet on you, but his or her bet on you in preference to the other similar companies they're seeing in roughly the same time frame. Why are you the best option in that market? Because they can only bet on one. Then the third category is potential partners. Again, you learn about this from prospective customers. Your solution may not be standalone. Do you need to integrate with some other technology? Do you need a service provider? Do you need professional services wrapped around it? What else might be there? Who are the other market participants who are well established? How did they get well established? Can they help you? What is your go-to market? We'll talk about that in length in a couple of weeks, but who are your prospective channel and market partners? And then again, our corner case, not corner cases, but our industry specific cases, risk factor and regulatory. Again, if you're selling to big energy companies, they're going to know what the regulatory issues are. They can read them to you chapter and verse and get you wildly better informed if you're not already. The prospective partners will, of course, governmental agencies, governments, other agencies, regulatory bodies. But boy, if you're going to be operating in a domain where any of these entities have authority or influence, you better understand what their thinking is and what their policies are and where they're headed. I've seen good and bad in this world. People have gone to market with something that turned out to be basically illegal. So that wasn't going to work. and then people who actually got close enough to the regulatory bodies to understand where the changes were headed and rode those waves to success. So, both, it's important to talk to all these participants. And there's one bonus outcome. So what do you get? Fine. I've laid out the overview of a whole lot of work. What, other than the de-risking, what do we get out of it? Well, you get a lot of outcomes that are interconnected. Remember, I talked about validation and product market fit and go-to-market inherently interconnected. From the product point of view, I will just let you scan these questions and come back to them, because I think that we've touched on most of them already. But you will have a much, much better idea of what your product and your solution need to look like than you can possibly generate on your own whiteboard. And really the punchline there is why is your solution the best choice they have among all the other possible solutions. Customer, right? You've got, anywhere from millions to thousands to hundreds of customers. What is your ideal customer profile? What are the determinants of that profile? I mean, there are 20, 40, 80 different aspects of a profile, different characteristics of a profile that you could identify. What are the 3 or 4 that you can tell from outside the building and make a prediction before you walk in the building as to whether they're in your ICP or not? That's the acid test of whether you understand this ideal customer profile. And then you drill in, right? How big is it? Who are the buyers and what's the purchase process? And, key question, where does the pain you're trying to solve fit in their priority stack? My analogy here is always the upgrade list. I hate being 9th on an upgrade list of 8, right? I'm sitting in the cattle class. You don't want to be in the cattle class. Most corporate executives and corporations have kind of 3 big objectives for the year. You got to be one of those 3. Go to market, same theme. We're just we'll talk about this more in a couple of weeks. But if you do your customer validation well, you're going to have really, really good first pass answers to all of these. And when your prospective investor asks you about your go-to-market, boom, this is what you're going to be able to try out. There is one bonus outcome.
Hey, Steve, I'm going to just to double down on something you just said. Good investors, you identified at the beginning of the call, and sort of you want to really be careful who your investors are. You want the best possible. The better the investor, the better their questions, and the more they're going to be lined up with these exact set of items you have on these last 2 or 3 outcome slides. Like, these are not Steve Plume's made up questions. These are exactly the kinds of questions that investors are going to ask, because this will help inform them on how good of a product is this and how far along are you. Have you de-risked? Have you as a founder de-risked the deal for the investor?
Yeah, thank you. There's one bonus outcome. Andy and Paul and I and some other people I know who are on this call remember the days when there were IPOs. There aren't a lot of those anymore. Most successful companies, because remember, we are doing this not just to improve the world, but to hopefully have a successful company. If you've done all this work and you've got these outcomes right, your successful partners eat you. You're typically going to get bought by a bigger company. That's the exit today. And so you, again, to circle back to the point Andy just made, the investors are absolutely going to ask you, what's your exit strategy? For crying out loud, do not say what 90% of people say, which is, oh, Google, Apple, Amazon, or Facebook's going to buy me. They're going to have to. That just says you're stupid. Think through, right, really who are the big companies in this market for whom you will be a fit 5 to 10 years from now. That's how you want to be thinking about this. And maybe one of those could be, Google, Apple, Amazon, or Facebook, but you got to back that up with facts and good thinking and not imaginary thinking. Okay.
Hey, Steve.
Yeah.
Steve. One quick comment on that is, that is just critical. And when you get to the point where you're starting to think about your go-to-market strategy too, people just don't, buy you at a whim's notice. Typically, there's some sort of a strategic partnership that builds over time, which leads to an acquisition. So just keep that in mind too, as you're taking a look at go-to-market, direct, indirect. Should we have an integrated, solution? Should we be part of their ISV ecosystem? Might we be able to get on their price list at some point in time, et cetera, et cetera. So it's important to think about that too.
Jeff's also with TFG. He didn't introduce himself earlier, but he's like the boss, one of the bosses. Okay. Playbook. So I promised you news you can use. There are so many resources available to drill into this. And you're going to want to create an interview guide. You're going to want to create several interview guides as you move through the process. I recommend Steve Blank's website. I recommend the Lean Startup. You can probably find bajillions of others. I think Dave Wiener's group at Bay Area I-Corps has resources. And we're not going to try to duplicate all of those here, right? I want to give you the high points and then encourage you to go look at, to build your own and to go take best practices from as many other sources as you can find. But, how do you do this? When, who, where? How do I know when to stop? And then what to ask? We've really already talked about when. Early. The earlier, the better. And as you move through ideation and validation and product development and market entry, take some time and go back. You don't need to reinvent the wheel every time. I'm not saying start with a blank whiteboard, but take everything you've learned and sit back and say, okay, what questions do we now face that we don't need the answer to? And run the same process. So let's talk about who. If you want to get to, at the beginning, when you're in the problem stage, the discovery stage, get to as diverse a base as you can in your general target market. And we talked about different titles and roles and all the plausible influencers. And you're going to flip back and forth between this problem discovery and solution. And so, ultimately you're going to wind up calling entities, individuals or organizations that you're pretty sure have the problem to test whether you understand who has the problem or not. And I've always found it an interesting exercise when you get to that phase. Write down somewhere before you go in, are they going to resonate with this or not? Because our brains have this remarkable ability to rewrite history and tell us, oh yeah, of course you were that smart. Of course you knew what the right answer was going to be. Often not true. Early on, go after diversity, geographic, size of company, number of employees, complexity, what their business model is. And start with your connections. You're going to expand beyond that, of course, to get that level of diversity. But I think another test that's become true in this more rigorous venture environment, and be interested to see if Andy and Paul agree with this or not, is I kind of expect, if I ask who are your first 20 customers, who's the pool your first 20 customers are going to come from? I kind of expect the founder to know those people by name, phone number, and email. Not kind of, oh, executives at, big retail companies. Not, well, like who? Like Bob, Susan, Mary? Who? How well do you know them? How often do you talk to them?
I agree, Steve. And I would also say that one question that I have been faced with was of the, I go in bragging about all the beta customers I have. And I will inevitably get caught up on the question of, well, how many of those beta customers are actually going to be paying customers when you go live? And yeah, it's sort of it's another trick question, so be careful. but both things, what you state is true. You should know them and then make sure that they're not just people who are kicking the tires and aren't willing to pay and buy and use the product.
Yeah, no tourists.
Yeah. Hey, Steve, one other point too is I can't tell you how many times I've worked with phenomenal clients that have primarily technical-based founders, and they choose to outsource sales and business development from the get-go. I tell them typically that's a recipe for failure. You will need to go close yourself personally 5 to 10, whatever, 20 of your your innovator or early adopter customers. Anybody that wants to outsource that, I think that's just a recipe for failure. But that's my personal experience.
Yeah, no, and Andy and I were talking about this earlier this week. Exactly. Complete agreement. We'll talk about it more in a couple of weeks, but here's the quick acid test while we're there. If you as CEO are still required to close every deal, you are not yet ready to scale. You are not ready to hire salespeople. You're not ready to hire marketing people. If any moron can close the deal and you just have to say yes, okay, good. Now you're ready to scale and you can start outsourcing it. Reading right, I won't take you through all this, but basically you're adding layers of understanding, you are adding layers of precision, and you're evolving out to broader and broader markets. So if you start with your own business friends, you ask them for their connections, and then ultimately when you get out to willingness to pay and validating the scale, okay, now you're allowed to use LinkedIn, you're allowed to go to people you don't know, you're allowed to camp out at a conference and ask people for 10 minutes of your time. But at that point, you're asking them 5 super specific questions. You're not trying to define solution or ICP or anything else. Where? No one says this better than Steve Blank. You should go watch his video. I've got the website in the back of the deck. Out of the building. You cannot do this process from your home COVID office. You cannot do this from your favorite coffee shop. Just to quote Steve a bit, you want to see the whites of their eyes. You want to hear the changes in their breathing. You want to see their body language. There is no substitute, especially in the discovery phase. Once you get into validation, phone, fine, whatever. But early on, no substitute for face-to-face. And in my speaker notes, I did not make this up, Jeff, and I did not coordinate that. Do not delegate this. This is what successful founders do. They do not send it to a consultant. They do not, ask their summer intern to go do it. They do it themselves. What I know you've been waiting for 54 minutes now, how much is enough? Okay, the most important answer here is the qualitative. When you hear the same thing from customers who have the same characteristics, when you can honestly and objectively write down before the conversation what you're going to hear and be 90% right. Depending on your market, quantitatively, consumer, it's going to be a lot. Small, medium business, a medium amount. You go back to some market where there are 8 customers in the whole world. My goodness, if you can get to 2 of them, good on you, but learn as much as you can. You need to be super confident about where you're headed. Let me see, is there anything else? Yeah, I think that's enough said on that one. Approach. And again, I don't want to read you the slides, especially 55 minutes in here, but be mindful of evolution. We've talked about that. Open-ended, not close-ended. And no, as I said earlier, not leading the witness. Didn't mention this one. Don't waste people's time. If it's a public company, know how big they are, know how many employees they are, know what their revenue is, know who their competitors are, know what businesses they're in, what geographies they're in. You should have all that before you even walk in the door. And you can gather a remarkable amount even about private companies. Ask your most important question first. Who knows when that email is going to come in when they say, oops, got to go. Thanks for your time. But then make sure you have an additional set of questions. Because here's the dirty little secret, not dirty, the magic secret. If you interest them by asking questions that they really care about, you will find that 10 minutes becomes 30 minutes, becomes 60 minutes, and you will get more information out of them than you ever imagined possible. And one way to do that is after every answer where it makes sense, tell me more, and then what? And that allows you to follow the serendipity, right? What you're looking for in this discovery phase is the unknown unknowns. What did you completely not expect that you're going to get out of this? And always, what should I have asked? That's another take from Steve Blank, who's as good at this as anyone. And remember, at the beginning, I said this before, I'll say it again. It's a weak signal. And if you ask these follow-on open-ended questions that engage them where they care, you'll get 10x the content on the second answer as you did on the first. Another good one that a friend who's on this call recommended is once you've established some communication, some degree of at least near-term empathy and trust, a great one is, geez, if you could wave a magic wand, what would that look like? And you'll get some remarkable answers. What do you ask? Okay, so here we are. Demographics, firmographics. Again, this is available for you in the document. Go to the websites. And as I said, get as much of this before you can, and then use your interview to clarify or fill in the holes. And only fill in, it's not a laundry list. What are the factors that are going to make the difference in whether this someone is really someone who's going to be in your early adopter category or not? What are the vectors that are going to matter for your solution? And don't waste time asking about anything else. Pain points. What are the top 3 pain points they're trying to address? And they may not even be trying to address them, right? To Andy's point earlier, what keeps them up at night? Why do they wake up early and stress over making their coffee? That's really what you're looking for. And if you can solve that, what changes? Usually we kind of phrase this as just for the company or for the customer, but in your case, what changes in the world? Are they really going to hit something that we all really, really, really have to solve in the next decade? That's important. I do apologize for the word interlocutor. I couldn't come up with another one, but meaning the person you're talking to, what role does he or she play in solving these problems or addressing these pains? And in their job, what are their top 3 priorities, right? And does that interlock with their employer's top 3 priorities? Because now you're in the right spot. They say, well, my company's top 3 priorities are this, but I'm in HR and I don't really have anything to do with it. Okay, thank you. I really appreciate it. Who else should I talk to? Goodbye now. Discovery phase, we've talked about this a lot. I think the issues here are, are we saving a life, curing an illness, or treating a headache? And the higher up that stack you are, the better off you are. The other key issue here is understanding what's the whole solution. Far too many companies go to market and realize they've only got half the answer and they need partners. And of course, the other thing to drill into is how are they solving or trying to solve these problems today? And a great indicator is if they're spending money and getting nowhere, you may have the right people and the right answer. As you get into validation, you can spin your approach a little bit. And instead of what are your pains or problems, you can say, hey, I've been talking to a lot of people and it seems like a lot of companies like you have this problem. Is that accurate? And then tell me more, help me understand, get their take on it. Then it's fair to say, I'd like to take 60 seconds to describe the solution. Okay, can I clarify anything? How well would the solution solve the problem? And make sure it's open-ended. You're drilling down on their answers, not feeding them answers. And I will just tell you, if at this stage, if any of you offer the people you're talking to a demo, I will hunt you down. Do not do that. You're not allowed to do that to your scaling. And then if there's something you really heard in a bunch of interviews, fair to say you didn't mention X. Would X be important? Why or why not? And you're back to the unknown unknowns. Willingness to pay. I think this is clear. You're not looking for $29.99 versus $30.99. You're looking for gross orders of magnitude, depending on your market. It's how many zeros to the left of the decimal. That's really all you're looking for. And that because that's going to determine your go-to-market model. We'll talk about that more later. And then what would be the components in an ROI analysis? Don't try to do it. Just, what are the major chunks of cost and benefit? And the real math will come much later. But now you'll be knowing how to talk to people. So I'm going to take 2 more minutes and then we'll go to Q&A.
Hey, Steve, this is Paul.
Oh.
Could you go back a couple slides? I want to make a point here. Go back one more. Okay, perfect. So this is really critical, this sequence that Steve just put you through. Discovery is getting information to develop a hypothesis of your solution. The validation is actually testing that solution with real potential customers. And, there's areas of gray. So Steve, I might pose you a question. Is in the validation process, where does the pivot happen? So in other words, you've gone through discovery, you've developed a hypothesis, you're in the
Yeah.
validation stage, you're getting information that may be contrary to your original hypothesis. Is that where the pivot happened and then you redo it again, or what have you seen?
I think that's a good way to frame it, right? You start, you've done a bunch of, call it basic research, open-ended research. You've come up with a hypothesis. I mean, this is the scientific method writ large. Now you go test it. You can go back to some of the people you already talked to and say, hey, I think this is what you told me. Am I right? And have them correct you. And you can go out to new people and say, I'm hearing this is something that would, fly in your situation. Am I right? And then, why or why not, and really drill. And this is, I think, you mentioned it, Paul, but you go back to the diagrams of the circles. This is where you're going to iterate, because the likelihood that you get it right the first try, it's pretty low. It's not zero, but it's not high. And there's a good diagram that we're going to be using next week, a double diamond diagram of the product development process, where there's an intersection point where if you're right, you flip, and if you're wrong, you go back and do it again. Andy or Jeff, anything else you want to add to that?
Yeah,
right.
I'm with you on this. I think that there's a lot of nuance to this, which could really take us a long time to uncover. But one thing that I'm just thinking through about a scenario where I thought I was selling to one department in a company. I thought I was selling to engineering people, and it turned out that I was actually selling to operations people. Same company, very similar problem, but the pain points were actually quite different, and people were unwilling to spend real money because they had solutions that were sort of good enough in one department, but they did not have solutions to solve a bigger workflow problem in another department, and they were willing to move huge amounts of money in our direction because there really wasn't anything out there other than like humans throwing bodies at it and so on. So there's a lot of nuance to this, and I think Paul's point is a really good one. Like, when do you pivot? Well, in this case, I learned from one group that we were off. Yeah, the company likes it, but the department did not, and the decision makers were like, sort of so interest, and it made us go back and revalidate everything when we learned that lesson.
Good. Okay, thanks. Hey, so I just want to, the timing's perfect. Dave Weiner from NSFI Core's on the phone now. When we get to Q&A, I will give him 30 seconds to introduce himself, but he's going to participate in the Q&A as well. And you'll understand why once he gives his background. So quick parting thoughts. And this, I think this riffs exactly on where Paul just took us. Evolve your questions, but not too quickly. You're going to have confidence. You're going to know confidence when you feel it. You're like, okay, I got this. I can move on. I don't have to keep asking the same question. And we're not a peer-reviewed scientific journal, right? This is a builder's fund, building a business. Judgment, intuition are okay. There's no statistical answer to this. It's intuitively, I understand what people are telling me. I'm going to start asking a new set of questions. We've talked about iterating. I'll just, each cycle is going to go faster. The first one's the slowest, especially if you haven't done it before, but you're going to squeeze more and more juice out of the sponge. And, you're going to be just down to, wow, I got these 3 more things to answer. And then I got it, nailed for now. These last 3 I'm going to give you are, they're very useful in the context of customer validation, but they're also pretty good maxims for life, I find. Listen at least 3 times more than you talk in this process. The point is to learn, not to convince. You're not advocating. You're not, remember, you are blessed if they talk you out of something stupid. So don't try to talk them into something stupid. It doesn't help anybody. If you're talking, you're not learning. The whole point is to learn. Do not trust your memory. I've said this a couple of times, but if it isn't documented, it didn't happen. Your recidivist brain will try to convince you that you were right, even if you were 180 degrees wrong. You got to write it down or record it or do whatever you like. And then structure is your friend. I've been telling this to people who work for me for more years than I care to count now. If you collect, in this context, if you collect your data in an oatmeal fashion, you have oatmeal when you finish. And your brain will fool you into connecting dots and telling you the story that you want to hear. If you haven't collected your data rigorously and, you know, done your analysis with data and shown it to people for review, you're just fooling yourself, and your chances of wasting your time, well, other people's money, first of all, and often in early rounds, you know, family money, friend money. It's not a great conversation. Tell your mom you just lost $50,000 or $100,000 for her. But the big issue is you're going to waste your time, and that's the scarcest resource in any startup, and more generally speaking in life. So with that, resources I mentioned, those are the 4 books that I called on, you know, in the course of this one. We'll be using them more in future, and a couple of just great websites. I saw someone in the chat also has the Lean Startup, and there's Lean Startup website. Oh, that's Paul. Cool. That's a really good one. There are many others, and feel free to share. And then just last thing before Q&A, if you're planning on attending next week and there's anything that we can do to make this better, send one actionable suggestion, either directly to me, or if for some reason you're shy or want to be anonymous or something, send it to Cameron and he'll batch them up and send them on to me anonymously. And with that, I'll pause. And before we take any questions, Dave, maybe if you could just give a very brief background of yourself.
Absolutely. Thanks, Steve. Thanks for having me here. Great event. My name is Dave Weiner. I'm the program director for Bay Area iCore. Steve just gave the website link in the last slide. We run a course every month focused on exactly this: the customer discovery process, customer validation process for early stage startups with founders. You know, get out, go talk to the folks that you hypothesize are your customers and stakeholders involved in the adoption of your solution or technology. Really get that much deeper understanding of them to de-risk your next steps. So that's a little bit about what I do. Very, very passionate about this methodology, and I see it work every single month for really, really great technical founders.
Hey, Dave, this is Jeff. Can you talk about the potential grants grant that might be available, and the difference between obviously the regional and the national iCore program? Because we get that question a lot.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So yeah, no cost or funding involved in our 1-week program that we run. That's at UC Berkeley, though it's a fully remote program. If you're coming out of a university, if you basically have IP at a university, some form of a university spin out translational research solution, then you could be eligible for continuing this process through a 7-week program through the National Science Foundation. And that comes with a $50,000 grant from the NSF for customer discovery. So great program, but if you're not eligible for that, our program still teaches you all the tools you could ever need to do it, though it doesn't come with the funding. And then, but any startup who does this methodology and does either of our other programs, I think has a much higher degree of success with other grant programs such as the NSF SBIR. Tech Futures Group is just a phenomenal resource to help you secure that type of funding. And I think doing this validation through either the 1-week program at Berkeley or the 7-week program, if you're eligible, really strengthens your proposal for that. So those are just a few ways that you might open up some funding opportunities through this process.
Hey, Jeff, while we're on that, could you just give a few words on the resources available through TFG?
Just generally speaking, or grant specific?
I think generally speaking, as to what, you know, TFG can offer to the companies in our audience here.
Oh, absolutely. Quick elevator pitch. We kind of position ourselves as a venture platform, although having said that, we're not investors. But simply stated, you know, we provide a group of individuals, advisors, at potentially no charge to tech companies in NorCal. We ourselves are grant funded through the SBDC. So if you're interested in the type of advisors that we'd have, and I'd encourage you to go take a look at our website, because we have generalists like myself. We've got specialists in federal agency, SBIR, STTR, grant financing. We've got CFO types. We've got go-to-market types. we've got a wealth of people with a lot of experience. So if you're interested in advisory services like that, come apply. Hit our website, apply. And if you get in, we're super pragmatic. We roll up our sleeves. Take a look at where you're trying to move the needle over the next 6 to 18 months, like fundraising or growing revenue or organizational issues, and we'll dive in where we can help.
Great. Cameron, anything in the feed, or did we?
No, I think we tackled it. I threw the ICOR Bay Area ICOR link in there, and then also the link for session 2. So I think we're dialed in and caught up on all our questions. I don't know if you wanted to go to a broader Q&A on the content that we've had, and happy to curate some of those questions. So if anyone has a question, I know you've had a lot of content there to start digesting, so would love to get your questions in here to see where you all are at. So don't be shy.
No, and if we,
I'd love to also hear if there's anyone who's gone through some customer validation challenges that are willing to share some experiences where you're at in your process or things that have worked. That would also be really good content for us to use as a riff starting point.
Perfect. Leslie, go ahead.
Yes, I have a question. You're doing outreach on LinkedIn for basically reaching out to people who are customers to do this process. What would be your pitch in the 180 characters? These are people that I'm connected to.
oh, that you're connected to?
Mm-hmm.
And how strongly? Like LinkedIn friends or people you really know?
It can be well, and it can be total cold.
Look, if they're people you know well, I don't think you over-engineer it. And Andy and Paul and Jeff and anyone else can express their opinions too. But if they're friends, it's like, hey, I'm doing this startup in this industry. I would love 20 minutes of your time to understand, get your point of view on it. Can I buy you a coffee? It's, if they're friends, they're just going to say, of course, when. Here's my calendar link.
And what if they're not?
Yeah, so I'd be careful about how you triage those. So let's put them into 3 categories. People you really know really well that we just talked about. Second group, you know them reasonably well. Maybe you run into them a couple times a year, whatever it is. Get through 10 or 20 of your conversations with the tier 1s first. Put it into one short paragraph. I've got a startup that's doing in this zone to solve this solution. I think you can say, honest to God, I'm still doing, I'm working on customer validation. Would you be part of my process?
Okay. That's what I've said. And, it's hit or miss. But I was just curious whether you lead with
it is hit or miss.
Where you'd lead with the question like, I'm talking to other people. I know that this is a problem with many, and companies are losing people because of it. I'd love to talk to you about this. So whether you're leading with the problem or whether you're leading with the typical, I'm a founder of da 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 da, do you have 15 minutes? Like, what are your thoughts on that?
I think when you get out to tier 3, I'm Leslie. I founded this company. We're solving this problem. Would you have? Because I think if you explain to me personally, and this may be idiosyncratic, if people take a paragraph to explain the problem, I've already lost interest.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm solving problems in, I don't know, AI in, semiconductor supply chain. Okay, I know exactly what the issue is and I care or I don't care. If you spend a paragraph for globalization is going away and blah, blah, oh, just shoot me.
Yeah. And what if another one of the tactics we're using is we have 2 surveys, each for 2 different personas. And they're surveys that definitely are open-ended. They're not leading at all. But the questions themselves kind of make somebody go, I wonder why they're putting these 2 things together. So it makes them keep reading. And then at the end, if you're open to a 15-minute thing, you can put in your contact information. But we don't ask for the contact information. So we're collecting the data that way. And so, but the survey thing, obviously is the trick is the questions. And I used to sell surveys, so I know the whole don't lead them on. But,
Right.
but we're collecting the information, and not everybody is willing to do a 15-minute, but we're asking for it. So any ideas on that?
Hey, Andy, I saw your thing go.
Hey,
I don't know if
Leslie.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, have you done a thorough vetting of the titles of the people that you're reaching out to, Leslie?
Yeah, actually,
Because
I come from one of the industries, and then the other industry is the sustainability industry. So basically, it's the CHRO in the HR industry, and it's the CSO in the, and then of course, obviously the CEO and the CFO who kind of hold the checkbook. But those are really the ones. And the thing I have going for me on LinkedIn is 23,000 contacts. So at least they know I'm like not some slouch contacting them. So that's
are those first level or first and second?
it's just gosh, I don't know. It's the main number that they put up.
Yeah.
That says
Okay, so if you have 23,000 followers on LinkedIn, that's a fairly significant sample size or data set. And you should really be able to do some really good targeting of titles. And you should do some A/B testing on each of those messages by title, if you can
that's
do
what
that.
I'm doing. Yeah. I
But
just wondered if you had a
yeah,
different
it's
one,
Yeah.
no, sorry, no magic. You can't pass go with Steve's
No, I mean,
strategy here.
I'm
You
looking
got
for
to go through the whole thing.
I'm looking for validation from the experts, I just thought, well, maybe, you guys are the experts, so.
I doubled down on Andy's A/B testing. Yeah.
Okay,
The
okay.
original question, right? Have 4 or 5 different paragraphs and see which has a higher hit rate.
Exactly. All right, awesome. Thank you so much. And I do have one question for Jeff, because I used Tech Futures in the past and I really enjoyed it. I just had such great advice. And at one point, I was just told that I basically got my fill of questions and that I didn't get any more, and I couldn't come and get any more consulting. So is that still the case, or?
It's it not, it really is case dependent, Leslie. I think one of the things that we are always cognizant of mutually with our clients is, because we're grant funded, as our grant funders always say, hey, how are you doing with your clients? Are you helping them hit their milestones? Are we hitting our metrics and milestones? And for us, it's all about economic impact. It's, have we helped our clients raise money, grow revenue, deal with some organizational issues? But really, the raising the money and the growing of the revenue is super important to us, as it is obviously with all our clients. This is not a negative thing, but that is to say that if we're working with clients for multiple years and we're not having that economic impact to the mutual benefit of both, our grant funders will say, hey, be wary of that. So if that makes sense.
Okay.
Yep. We have our scorecard.
Perfect. Well, we
Yeah.
do have an additional question in the chat, and I'll read it. And Paul said he would take this one, and then feel free to add on if anyone else would like to. So, Gabriel's a go-to-market lead in an early stage startup, and any advice on how to present customer discovery insights to the rest of the founding team and getting their buy-in. So take it away, Paul.
Yeah, thanks, Cameron. Gabriel, I think that's a super important question. And I'm actually going to approach this from perhaps a different perspective, which is really what all you CEOs and startup founders should be thinking about. So what Gabriel's saying here is he's the guy for an early stage startup that's talking to potential clients. He's got great insights on what they're looking for, not looking for, willing to pay. And he wants the ability to present that to the founding team and get their buy-in. And first thing I would say, Gabriel, is the first thing your CEO and founder should be doing is directing you to collect that feedback and have a mechanism to present that to them. So for all of you early stage startups, if you have an opportunity to gather insight from your folks that are actually talking to clients, you've got to create systems for that and encourage that and create a culture around that, because that is incredibly valuable information, especially for an early stage startup. So Gabriel, I think the only advice I'd give to you specifically is just make sure the founders and the leaders of your company realize that you have this information and how much it can improve their product at this stage, and the benefits of having a system to actually give them that feedback on an ongoing, consistent basis. So great question.
I'll add on to that. Make them go with you. If you're busy out there doing customer validation interviews, I don't know how many people around the table when you're trying to share the insights, but make every single one of them go to at least one conversation with you and hear it live. There's no substitute.
Yeah, I think that's great advice from both Paul and Steve. I think every founder, if they can, will greatly benefit from being part of some of these conversations. And sometimes it's almost, if you're removed from it, it's hard to like really understand that and hear it. So once you're like in that orbit and you hear your customers, these stakeholders sharing their biggest pains, their biggest needs, their willingness to pay, that can really like hit the light bulb. And so we always, at least in our program, try and get the direct founders to go in. Obviously, as you grow and scale, it's a little bit harder to do. You get bigger and busier, but getting them in on these conversations, I think, will really help to connect the dots, and they'll probably be seeking out more, and they're going to want more. I want to really learn and dig in on this, so they're going to be asking you for this.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, and as Leslie's adding, as long as you train them not what to say, that's a good addition. Yes, this is not a sales meeting. This is a discovery meeting. Yeah, good caveat. Thank you. Okay, Cameron, we got anything else, or have we worn them down?
I don't know. We'll see. We'll give them one last shot. If there's any lingering questions, we'll give it I'll buy some time here. So maybe I'll do some kind of concluding around the recording and follow up with the PDF. And then if there's any last questions, we'll take it. But as we shared, we will be meeting next Thursday for our second session. We'll be diving into product and MVP. We will be following up with the recording as well as a PDF version of the slides that you saw today with some hyperlinks to those books and a variety of the tools. If there's any questions or feedback, feel free to use those emails that you see there for actionable suggestions, and we do appreciate that. And with that, we'll see if there's any last questions.
I just want to give a shout out for Steve for a great presentation.
Yeah.
Thanks, guys. Thanks. It's fun. I hope people got value out of it and can go and act on it. And the one promise I'll make is that next week's will be shorter, because we won't be doing the overview of the series.
Perfect. Well, with that, I wanted to, all right, Patrick, you have a question there.
Yes, hello. I have a quick comment. Good afternoon,
sure.
everyone. My name's Patrick. I'm entering my senior year at Sacramento State University. I have no questions per se. I just wanted to thank everybody for taking some time out of your schedules, and we appreciate it. Thank you.
Hey, that's why we're here. Glad you found it useful.
There's one more question in the chat from Chris. I'm happy to field it. Okay, so Chris asked, when doing customer discovery for large industries that have a lot of people, what is the best strategy to getting information from these organizations about the pains they have, the product that you're working on developing? I would say, I'll give my thoughts, welcome it from the rest of the crew too. I mean, questions I like to ask is, hey, can you walk me through the last time? First, hypothesize what's the job title or job titles that you think are the stakeholders involved in the adoption process for your solution. Try and talk to them. Maybe you're going to be wrong. It's okay if you are. But when you're talking to them, one great question I like to always ask is, hey, can you walk me through the last time you adopted a new technology for this, or last time that you had to do this, whatever that flow or that problem is. Then I say, okay, well, last week we did this, and then we first heard about it through this person. Then they kicked it to me, and then I, assessed this, and then I handed it off to this person to like write the check, or something like that. But like you can find out when it happens, how often it happens, who are the different stakeholders involved, and what do they care about? Because they're all going to have sort of different value propositions. and decision-making processes. So I think that's what you're asking. I hope I answered that correctly. But yeah, it's just basically hypothesizing on the job titles. And again, if you're wrong about who it is, and maybe I'll talk to someone that, like, I'm not involved in that, but hey, here's who is. Or no, that's the quality control folks who actually handle that. And then all of these are just clues on who else to talk to, and then sort of what sort of questions to ask from them. Now, having them walk you through a past time or flow can give some really good clues on who's involved and what they care about.
Very good. Well, with that, thank you to everyone for being here, and thank you, Steve, for leading the charge, and Paul, Jeff, and Dave, and Andy for adding in as well. And we appreciate the partnership with Tech Futures Group, and we look forward to seeing you all next week. If you haven't registered for that session, please do, but we will be at the same Zoom link. So keeping it pretty simple for you as we go forward. So thank you all, and we'll see you next week at noon.
Great. Thanks,
All right.
everybody. Bye.
Have a good one. Bye-bye.